I am having
Okay.
a chat today with someone who I came across on the internet who calls himself Freethinking Jew. Just to put those people who don't know anything about Judaism into the picture a little bit, I don't really want to spend too much time on the Jewish aspect of what, of your ideas, although I will touch upon it because I'm from the same kind of background. But just those people, just very briefly, I think, if I'm right to say, that we were brought up Orthodox,
That's right.
and you eventually broke away from that, and you became what you describe as a free thinker. And I read an article of yours about antinatalism, and I know that the Jewish community, as many other communities and the world in general, but the Jewish community is a very natalist type of culture, and so what you wrote was very unusual to see, and that's in fact the first person that I've come across that's openly Jewish and also antinatalist. When did you first think about not the idea of not having children?
Yeah, I think it was probably a couple years ago. I was going through a bit of a difficult time, as we all do at different times, and I think because of my religious upbringing and going through the Jewish education, where you're always learning biblical texts and texts from the Talmud and the Mishnah, and so when things happen in my life, naturally these Jewish teachings just pop into my head that are relevant, and I think there are several that kind of relate to antinatalism, but the one that really stuck into my head when I was going through these challenging times was there's one it's called the Ethics of the Fathers. It's this collection of rabbinic teachings on ethics from, I think it was compiled in the 2nd century, and one of the teachings there, in fact, I'll read you the exact quote here. It says, "Against your will, you are formed. Against your will, you are born. Against your will, you live. Against your will, you die." And so that, it popped into my head, and I was thinking, like, what kind of a raw deal is this? Nobody asked us to be put into this world. So that in of itself, I think, is morally problematic, because normally we don't say that it's okay to put anyone into any situation without their consent. I mean, maybe we have some exceptions. If somebody commits a crime, we put them into prison without their consent. When somebody, in times of war, in the past, we've forced people to join the military without their consent. But generally, all of us, if not at least the vast majority of us, would agree that generally it's not okay to put anyone into a situation without their consent. But that's what this teaching is reminding us, is that for 100% of us, it was against our will that we were formed and born, and beyond that against your will you live. That not only are we brought here without our consent, but we have to stay here. It would be one thing if we could just easily opt out. We're brought here, okay, fine, they did it without our consent, but at least, at any time we could just, opt out and say, okay, it's just not for me. But the fact is, as we know, it doesn't work that way. Suicide itself, from my understanding, is that always, or at least any way that I'm aware of doing it, it involves pain for the individual who's doing it. Jumping off a bridge, the person's bones shatter, the organs shatter. My understanding is hanging and shooting, every which way, there's pain involved. And then leading up to it as well, there's a tremendous amount of anguish and angst, and stress that I would imagine wouldn't be involved in leading up to that decision. And then obviously everyone else involved, no matter how much of a hermit or a recluse one is, there's there's always someone, right? There's always a parent or a son or a daughter or a sibling or a former classmate or a coworker or, you know, I had a former classmate who I wasn't even that close with the past few years, um, but when he took his life, it was terrible. You know, it was devastating for me, and I still think of him. So again, it just adds to the kind of the why I think it's such a moral. It's so morally questionable is that we're bringing them being into existence and into a situation that they can't even easily get out of without a great deal of suffering. So
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to just touch on a couple of things that you said and play maybe a bit devil's advocate. Firstly, you said we've come in here against our will. I'm not sure that I'd agree that we come here against our will. We just don't come here with consent. So, and I think that can be different, although it doesn't justify it. But that's number one. Number two, a devil's advocate would argue, and I've heard this argued before, that you can't get the consent from a child, and therefore it's not relevant to talk about getting consent from something you can't get consent from.
Yeah, well, yeah. So to me, I think that just makes it even worse. That just drives home how universal this problem is. How, again, 100% of people who are born, it's without their consent. It would be great if we could ask their consent. Ask, do you want to do this or not? But the fact is we can't, and that's kind of the fact we have to deal with. And so, to me, that's precisely the point: is that no matter how wonderful you think you're going to be as a parent, no matter you're going to give them the best of everything, it's still the fact that you're putting them into this world without their consent, because that's the way the world works.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
It's interesting. You should say that, because that reminded me of an argument which came for me. I came across antinatalism about 2 years ago, and I've got 3 children, aged 22, 20, and 13. So it's a really interesting situation for me. And in the last maybe year, about a year ago, something just clicked. Certain things sort of just click. Certain sort of ideas and insights just sort of come to me, and because I would ask people occasionally. I ask people lots of interesting questions and make films about it as well. I would ask people things like, if you would have had the choice to come into existence, yeah, would you have come in? Yeah, and a lot of people say yes, right? And then I realized that that's actually the wrong question, because the real question is, had God or the creator, not that I believe in such a thing, but let's just say there was a creator, and let's just say there was a soul, and the creator came to your soul before it incarnated, yeah? And instead of saying to your soul, look, this is your life is ahead of you, it said to your soul, okay, your parents are sort of they're getting drunk tonight, and I know what they're like, right? And they're gonna basically produce you, right? They could produce a child, right? Do you want to go for it? And then you'd say, well, okay, well, what does it involve? And then you would get like a whole big. You'd be sat down. You'd watch a whole long video about all the possible things that could happen to you, all the possible illnesses that could happen to you, all the possible accidents and tragedies that could happen to you, as well as all the possible lovely things that could happen to you. But you could, you would know that you could be born a paraplegic. You could suffer from terrible mental health for years and kill yourself. And you'd be given like percentages of all the possible things that that could go wrong, right? Then would you choose to come in? And even then, people say yes, right? which still doesn't justify bringing someone else in, because the person that they brought in, yeah, you don't know whether that person would say yes or no. That's number one. Number two, even if you would say yes, yeah, I mean, if you brought, you know, I have 3 children. If I would have brought someone in that was seriously disabled, then that would have been for me really, really difficult, right? And for the child, it would be really, really difficult. So it's, even if I could cope with that on some level, and I'm prepared to take the risk, yeah, the child isn't, you know, how can you, basically that's what you're doing to a child. You're playing roulette. You know, when anyone has unprotected sex, they're playing this crazy game of roulette, and you know, and they've no idea what's going to come out, you know, and the odds can be better or worse with some people, you know, in different situations. You know, I think that when I had my children, my odds were quite good, right? But it doesn't make any difference. I was still playing roulette. I was still just throwing the dice. And I know that, and by the way, another reason why I now wouldn't do it, for all the money in the world, I wouldn't create another human. And that is because I do really go with, I do think that the idea of don't do unto others as you wouldn't do to yourself is definitely pertinent. And in this case, there is absolutely no chance that I would have pre-birth would have agreed to take that risk. I absolutely no way I would want to take that risk, right? And why even would I? For what? For even if I had, you know, I have a fabulous life, right? I do have an absolutely fabulous life, yeah. But I wouldn't take the risk of serious disability. I'd have to come into serious disability. What? For the fabulous life that I had, which is made up of basically nothing so really amazing. It's great, whatever, but you know, I definitely wouldn't take that risk myself. Would you?
No, I wouldn't. And the other thing is that, in addition to everything you said, which I completely agree with, I think in the case of bringing a new being into existence, it's even, you know, and David Benatar, the philosopher, you know, talks about this a lot, that you're actually taking complete nothingness. You know, you're taking something. You know, in the example you gave, where you ask someone, if you were given a choice, would you be born? That's assuming that there's something there, you know, that there's a being there to be asked, you know, do you want to go through with this? But it's even beyond that, you know, in fact, right? Because the day before a man and woman get together and conceive, the day before that, it wasn't like there was a baby there, you know, waiting to have the decision made to be born or not. There's nothing there. There's literally nothing there. So it's not even, so you're not even benefiting them. Like even if they do decide, even if somebody, once they're born, decides, you know, I'm happy to continue living, and I'm happy to be given this shot at life, but you're not really benefiting something that's not there, right? So whenever we actually make this decision to have kids, we're not really, it would seem like we're not really, it's impossible to say that we're actually benefiting this being, because there's nothing there. You can't benefit something that's not there. And the other thing is that, even like you said, even we don't know for sure what's going to happen. Maybe even despite our best intentions, you know, the person, you know, the DSM-5 is massive, you know, with all the different possible mental illnesses, and then there's all the physical illnesses, and who knows, based on current events, what kind of crazy stuff is going to be happening. So there's really no way for us to know, like you said. But even if, you know, even if it were possible to be confident that this baby I'm going to bring into the world is going to have nothing but happiness and going to have a great life, I think it would still be, I think there's still some serious moral questions there. And, you know, I gave a couple analogies in that blog post that you saw about bringing someone to a party. And, I would love for somebody watching this, if they think it's a ridiculous analogy and they can show how it's false, I'd be delighted to be shown, to be corrected on this. But when I think of bringing a new being into the world, I kind of think of it as putting someone, you're putting someone into a situation. And so the example I think of is let's say there's a party going on, and I know that there's this party happening, and I'm so confident that you're going to enjoy this party that I don't even bother asking you if you want to come along. Instead, what I do is I sneak into your bedroom when you're sleeping. I know you're planning to go to sleep early on Saturday night when the party's happening, and I sneak into your room. While you're sleeping, I take you, I put you onto my shoulder, I throw you into my car, and I bring you to the party while you're sleeping, and drop you into the party. So already at that point, right? I think we would all say that's a problem, right? No matter how the party turns out, right?
I don't know if like it's a really good friend and you think the party is going to be really good and they would not want to miss it. Oh, I see. You say, like, why not tell them first? You mean, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the issue of consent, right? Like, I think generally we would say that the person has a right to decide for him or herself, and so in this case, to make the decision for your friend, I don't know, maybe your relationship with your friends is different, and you have that understanding, but that would be because you developed that understanding, right? You're close enough with your friend to that it's almost like your friend is you feel like your friend has given you that consent to do these things on the spot. But generally speaking, I think we would say that to just take somebody by force and throw them into a party while they're sleeping, I would think is at least questionable. Yeah, so at that point you say, okay, thinking about bringing a new being into this world, even if I'm sure that you're going to love the party and it's going to be wonderful, but same thing when you bring a new being into the world. Even if I'm sure that it's going to be great, but can we do this? Can we do something can we force somebody into a situation like that? But let's say, what if I add to the party situation that it's guaranteed that the party is going to include repeated pain, physical, emotional, psychological. So not only am I taking this other person and forcing him to be in this party, but he's also going to. But I know going into it that I'm putting him into a party that's guaranteed to include physical, emotional, and psychological suffering. So I would think that at that point it makes it even more morally questionable for me to be doing this to this other person. And as we know, no matter how well-intentioned we are if we become parents, suffering is inevitable of physical, emotional, psychological, no matter what we do, and no matter how good our coping skills are, right? I mean, I saw there was a piece in the National Review that was critical of antinatalism, and the guy he points out that suffering is partly psychological, right? It's how you deal with pain, and it's a good point. I mean, it's true that two people in the same situation dealing with the same pain, one might be able to cope better than the other, but I think pain is still inevitable, right? If someone loses a loved one or breaks a bone, or there's certain things that no matter how good your coping skills are, it's still going to be painful unless you just have no.
And worse than that, also, there is a significant chance that they're going to experience really, some really significant pain, some really, I mean, there's so many different illnesses, so many different mental and physical illnesses, so many possibilities, that there is a good chance that it won't just be a little bit of pain. It could be terrible pain.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when you multiply it, when you look at the whole life, the whole, the average lifespan, and you think of how much it adds up, it's, because I think the third step, so first you're putting them into this party without their consent. Beforehand there's going to be a lot of suffering there, and yet you put them in this party anyway. And the last step to me is that you
can't leave the party.
You can't leave the party, right? You can't leave the party. So I think at this point, you'd think this person, whoever's doing this is an absolute sadist. Like, how can you do this to another human being? And so I think, again, if someone can point out how the analogy is flawed, I'd love to hear it. But it seems to me that that's what we're doing whenever we bring a new being into this world. That we're making the decision on their behalf. We might think it's going to be a great life for them, but we also know that there's going to be a lot of suffering involved, and they can't leave. And with a career analogy, it was a similar thing. It's like if I say, I know the perfect career for you, so I'm so sure you're going to know that you're going to love this new career that I have in mind for you. So I'm going to take you and just drive you over to the office and throw you into it. And again, do I have a right to do that? And add to the fact that that the career is going to have a lot of bad days, a lot of suffering. And if I say you can't even choose a different career, you can't even leave. Right? Again, that would be, I think most of us would agree that that's an issue. So that's kind of how I see it.
Okay. It's interesting because I feel like I'm always a bit suspicious of whatever my current ideas are, and that suspicion is often multiplied by my family, who complain how often I change my mind about things. So they're hoping that this antinatalism is going to be a fad. And that I'll be on to the next thing next, but I'm not quite sure if there is anything that goes beyond antinatalism other than maybe pro-mortalism, but it's still part of the same thing. But I am suspicious of cognitive bias. I'm suspicious of why I might be attracted to this type of thinking, and that I'm not thinking straight. But I admit that, and I like to keep that in my awareness. And at the same time, I feel like I'm like a born again. It's like a new religion in a way. It's like a born again. I feel born again into the antinatalist idea, because firstly, it's like I feel like a born again Jew. We don't usually call it that, but in our culture, we have this idea that irreligious, non-religious Jews become religious, and it's like this light bulb comes on, and it all seems to make sense, and it's lovely, and then they get into it, and that's it. They become religious Jews, and I feel like almost like that in a way, in that
you've been saved.
Everything seems to make sense now in a way, kind of, right? And it just seems that the arguments are just they're so strong. I was saying to my wife yesterday, who completely rejects them all, manages to, that's fine, whatever. But I was saying to her, like, I have yet to come across any serious attempt to debunk antinatalism. I don't know. I'd love to find anything, but I haven't. I genuinely really haven't. I don't know if you have. If you have, please let me know, because I'm just interested to push my views a little bit. So yeah, they just seem so compelling, and just your argument on its own is compelling. Yeah, and that, I think you wrote it if I remember, it was a while since I read your article, but it was about how simple it really was to come to this conclusion. And that's just, to me, your argument is one of many arguments that, can pile on top of that. And I haven't found any convincing counter arguments really to it. And at the same time, I kind of am aware that I don't want to really, so part of me says that I want to, but really I don't want to, because like it's weird, because it feels like I feel finally, that I think I understand a little bit about what's going on here on this planet, and it sort of makes sense to me. And the funny thing about it is that it's kind of, in a weird type of way, given me a kind of mission, more than a clearer mission than I think I've ever had with what I do. Because what I do, all my stuff that I do out on the streets, which I do because I like doing it, but at the same time, I've been doing all sorts of stuff to highlight all sorts of madness in the world. But now I feel like the idea of getting people to question procreation, I can't think of a more important thing to do, if there is anything that's important to do. I mean, in the big picture, none of it's important, but it feels like that to me. So I'm in this funny sort of place of, I am really interested in counter arguments. I'm aware of my own biases. I'm also sort of aware that I'm quite different to my wife, for example. My wife is just a very positive person. She also uses denial I think we all do really, to get by, but she is quite positive, whereas I find it more difficult. I find it my default position, even though I don't come over like this on the internet, but my default position is to notice what is not okay. Well, I do come over the internet, because a lot of the stuff that I do is sort of poking fun of things that aren't okay, when there are still lots and lots of things that are okay. And I think that although the arguments are very strong, I think that natalists might come back to you and say to you that at the end of the day, if the party, yes, you're forcing people into this party, right? But the party is generally on balance really good. It's like an amazing party. It's like, look at all this stuff out here, and being in consciousness, and beautiful trees, and relationships, and it's all, it's this unique experience. And perhaps they might certainly accuse me of just being negative and looking at the negative, and the suffering and the pain, when there's so much wonderfulness and joy. And why aren't you looking at that?
Yeah. So that's why I think that's I think the stuff we were talking about earlier, about that, first of all, we don't know that going in. We don't know that that this baby's life is going to be wonderful. We don't know what kind of sicknesses they're going to have. We don't know what the world's going to be like. So even though, it might be true that right now, if you did a survey of the entire, mankind, and asked them, are you happy that you were born? It could be the vast majority, at least in the developed world, would say that they're happy with it. But you don't know if your child is going to be one of the minority. I mean, obviously there are plenty of people in the developed world who are very unhappy, and who do jump off bridges, and it's not obviously their parents could have never. I don't think anyone who's taken his or her own life, I don't think any of them had parents who said, what, I think we're going to have a child, and I think it's probably going to take its own life someday. No parent thinks. Every parent thinks that has this confidence that this child is going to be happy. But so maybe the child will be in the minority and not be happy. And B, like we said, even with that, and even if it ends up being a great life, but there's still all this suffering. And like, I really like David Benatar's asymmetry argument. I know not all philosophers accept it, but to me it makes a lot of sense. He says that when you're bringing a new being into the world, you're not benefiting that being, because like we said, there's nothing there right now, so you can't benefit something that's not there. So whatever benefits they get from being alive, that's not really a benefit to them, because had you not had them, there just wouldn't be anything there. But on the other hand, you are causing suffering, right? Since every life has suffering, by making this decision to bring this being into the world, you are making a conscious decision to, I know it sounds terrible, but to cause suffering, because it's just impossible. No matter how wonderful of a parent you are, it's just impossible. So even the best of life, even if they're right, even if the natalist is right and says, yeah, the vast majority of people are happy that they're alive, and even if your child is going to be among those, but what it comes down to is, are you really benefiting anyone by doing this? Are you really benefiting this being by putting it into a situation that's going to include a lot of suffering, no matter what? And when the benefits, well, if you don't have a child, there's nothing there to be missing out. There's no FOMO going on. There's no fear of missing out amongst things that don't exist. And it's just, I think we just haven't thought about these things that much. I don't know what your sense is, out on the battlegrounds, but my sense is that it's just, we're just kind of early on in bringing this into people's awareness. And so so when we talk about, are there counter arguments, I think there just hasn't been a lot of discussion about it until now. We've just kind of always assumed, well, that's kind of what we do. It's natural. You grow up, you go to school, you get married, you have kids. It's just kind of what we do. We never really questioned it that much. And I think it's only now, or in the recent few years, that we're actually saying, that's how progress always happens, right? I mean, we take something that we assume is natural, and then at some point, some philosophers or legal experts, or in some cases religious leaders, say, hey, let's think about this for a second. Yeah, it might be natural it might be natural to commit genocide, but at some point we said, hey, wait a minute, is this really right? We're all human beings here, we're all the same. And it might have been natural to, it's natural to procreate, right? And to just spread your seed to as many people as possible, as many beings as possible. But obviously it's a long time ago already, we decided, just to be committing adultery and cheating on your wife or your husband, it causes a lot of pain. So probably not a good idea, even though it's natural, And so I guess the same thing needs to happen with the natalism thing. Is that at the very least, what I'm hoping is, I have no illusions that at least in my lifetime, that all the 7 billion people or 8 billion people in the world are going to decide we're not going to have kids. But I guess my minimum hope is that it won't be automatic anymore. People will actually, at least it'll be acceptable to make the decision, regardless of what community you're in, to say, what, I don't think it's right. I'm not going to do it. I'm not judging other people. I'm not, if my brother or sister has a baby, I'm going to be happy for them. I'm not going to be like this, I'm not going to cause more suffering by spoiling my siblings' joy. Once they make that decision, I might speak to them beforehand. But if the situation arises, but once they make the decision and have a child, I'm not going to cause more suffering by raining on their parade. But I think at least in the community that I grew up in, the idea of choosing not to have kids, it was unheard of. Like, it was, to choose not to have kids it's you would be, everybody would be talking about you, like it couldn't happen. And so that's, at least that's my hope, is that at least it'll become okay to make that decision, that, and people will say, okay, I understand it, it's I won't assume that person is selfish or misguided or or have some mishigas in their head for making this decision not to have a kid. No, it's actually something that people do, and a lot of really good people do, and yeah, that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, I like that. I was just thinking, actually, as you were talking, that one of my closest friends has just had his third child after I'd been banging on for 2 years about my opposition to procreation. Just shows how it's so ingrained. It's so ingrained in the mind. The other thing I thought of is, I think that there is a huge amount of potential for amazing artistic, films and general artistic creations around antinatalism. It's such an interest. So, for example, I'd love to see a film. It could be a short film, right, of one of your metaphors. You imagine, there's this little film where you're dragging this guy to the party, and he gets there and he's having a good time, but then a couple of people get a terrible disease and die, and he sort of wants to leave, and they say, no, sorry, you can't leave now. And this film carries on. Like that kind of thing. I think there's a lot of opportunities for some really fun,
good idea. That sounds great.
Creativity around the subject. Yeah. The other thing that I kind of ran past you is the idea of I wonder how the Jewish community would deal with, and whether maybe we can get someone else to do it and join in. But the idea of having Jews against procreation, because it is interesting that I've also studied Jewish texts a fair bit in my life. And it is interesting that there are so many, the Jewish texts are so wide in their ideas, and yet, today's world has become just awfully homogenized, and those ideas that are in various places in the Talmud and in Jewish texts and in the Old Testament. They're kind of being relegated, and people don't really take them seriously. But that one, for example, that you mentioned, I wasn't even aware of that. There are other ones as well, aren't there? There's an opinion in the Talmud that says it would be better off not to have been born.
Yeah.
And so, what do you think about reviving this idea, right? Basing it on some of the texts that back this idea. And then, by the way, there are also Christian texts as well, which are antinatalist. There are small little pockets of Christian texts that are antinatalist as well. What do you think about the idea of starting some kind of, just maybe, a light-hearted, it can be, a Facebook group or something, Jews against procreation? How do you think that would be received?
Interesting. I haven't thought about it, but I've thought about those texts that talk about this. But when it comes to let's assume that it is, that it would be progress to do this, to get to a more antinatalist world. I figure it makes sense to look at other progress that's happened and kind of follow that model, and whether it's, and just in our own lifetime, let's say LGBT rights, right? So how did that happen? I think about, I haven't studied it in detail, and I'm sure people have sociologists and have studied it to actually really hone in on what actually really worked and how this happened so rapidly in the last few years. But I mean, just my sense as a spectator is that it got to the point where my coworker is gay, my cousin is gay, and I see that their love for their significant other and it's just like my love for my spouse and they're really cool people. They're just in every other way. They're just like me. And it got to the point where people just realized that that it became more. It went from being a concept, in the air, like, okay, is this right or is not right, to actual human beings that they met who made them realize that there's no reason why their love should be any different from my love for my partner. At least that's part of it. Maybe there are other factors, but so I think, and I think with the vegan, I don't know where you stand on the vegan thing, but I think again, it's it went from being just a bunch of animal rights extremists to, oh, actually my sister has been experimenting with the vegan thing, and it's actually not just she doesn't just eat vegetables all day, and it becomes more relevant and more real and more possible, and not just out there. So,
right.
So I would think that.
So you're saying that it would be a good idea to follow maybe see how they manage to spread their ideas.
Yeah, because I think it's so. My sense is it's just so early on that if we go out there and just say, hey, everyone who has a child is evil, then it's too, to me, it's just way too early for that, because it would be like to me it's like the LGBT rights movement 50 years ago,
right?
You know what I mean? Or civil rights for I'm American, so civil rights for African Americans, going out there with a megaphone and saying everyone who is a slave owner, and doing that in the 1600s, it's like people would just be like, dude, what are you talking about? Of course we have slaves. So to me, there's a few steps that need to happen before that, to, first of all, like I said, to make it, to at least get to the point where it's acceptable, where it's not a given. And I think you just do that by making the decision for oneself, and that way everyone who knows you, and being open about it, being willing to be open about it and say, actually we decided not to have kids for reasons X, Y, and Z, and then it puts it out there, and the idea out there, and then they'll meet someone else who made the same decision, and it'll be like, it goes from being just this radical idea to being something that's, oh, actually I know really normal people who are making this decision. And then hopefully over time, maybe you can get to the point where actually, if you're still doing this thing that your friends are not doing anymore, then like, why are you still doing this? Why are you still, you know what I mean? So
why are you still bringing people to the party?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
A very long party.
Exactly.
Okay, so how did your what's your family situation? May I ask you how old you are? Do you mind? I don't know how old people are these days anymore. How old are you, and what's your situation, and what's your family? Are they Orthodox Jews, your family, and what do they think about it all?
So I'm 41 and I am single, and no kids, never married. And I'll tell you, it doesn't help in the dating world to have this position, since most people don't have this position. In fact, now that I'm in my 40s, I feel like maybe it'll be easier if I just try to date women who are past the natal age.
Or you could be part of the growing online antinatalist community, and then you would have, someone that was you could date people who are antinatalists. There should, I think there's definitely there's definitely space for that, for there to be matching websites of people who are antinatalist, or that should be on the, that should be definitely on the, it should be a tick box. Are you a natalist?
Yeah.
So
That'd be cool.
yeah, okay. So your family, do your family know about your decision?
No, not as far as I know.
Right.
No.
And are your family Orthodox?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Very Orthodox.
Except for my brother. My brother stopped being Orthodox many years ago, but my parents and my sister and my mother grew up Reform, not not so
Right.
religious. So like her family, her side is mostly not Orthodox, but my father and my parents and my father's side are all Orthodox.
Yeah. Right. And they don't know. Why haven't you told them?
Well, I actually haven't really told them that much in general about my religious beliefs. I know different people have different approaches. I've met a lot of other formerly religious Jews, and there's all different approaches. How they've, some are completely out there, completely like very outspoken about their, why they made the decision, and they're just like, this is who I am, deal with it. And I can totally understand, that approach. In my case, I just for myself, I don't know if it's the right decision or not. I just kind of felt like as soon as there's a good reason for me to do it, for me to tell one of my friends from my Orthodox life or certain family members, as soon as there's a good reason to do it, I'll do it. But right now I live across the ocean from most of my family and friends from my Orthodox time, from my Orthodox life. And so, why would I, like, what benefit, who would it benefit for me to break their heart and tell them that I'm this heretic now, So
how long have you been a heretic?
I think it's been about, I went through a very gradual process of many years of questioning and doubting, but I think about 8 years ago or so now, 8.5 years ago, is when I kind of turned the corner and realized that, I just, for a while I felt like I had this issue that I had to resolve, this almost like a sickness, like I need some rabbi or a Jewish studies scholar to cure me of of my doubts and questions. But I think about 8 years ago is when I kind of felt like, actually it's okay. It's like, it's not something wrong with me. It's actually a good thing that if I don't just accept the things that I happen to be born with, the beliefs that I happen to be born into, then, if I don't accept things without good reasons to accept them, then I shouldn't feel bad about that. It's actually something I should be proud of.
100%. Just going back to antinatalism, so do you discuss your antinatalist ideas with your current friends? And I don't know if you have work colleagues, or I don't know, but do you discuss that with friends and colleagues?
A couple of them, actually. When I was going through that hard time, and I was thinking about that statement about, against your will you live and whatever. I remember sharing that on WhatsApp with, I think I changed my WhatsApp status to that for a while, and I, and the friends that I usually complain to and vent at when I'm, those kinds of friends, I was like, what kind of a raw deal is this, Just, so I didn't necessarily go through the whole, the whole argument and everything, but I did bring that up, and I shared this blog post with a couple of my friends, and they went back and forth a little bit, but I haven't shared it with any of my friends from my Orthodox days.
And have you seen any of the antinatalists online? You've mentioned Benatar, so I presume you've read his book. Have you seen any of the stuff online? Do you like it? Do you not like it? What do you think about the stuff that's online at the moment?
Yeah.
Any of it?
So I think I think a lot of it's really good. I like, I think when I tweeted out my blog post, I had some nice responses from people in the antinatalist community. There was one in particular, I forget what it's called. There's a Twitter account that posts something, I think maybe every day they post like an antinatalist message, and some of them are really, I think are really, really powerful. I think, and yeah, David Benatar, I think has been great. My only concern is that, I don't know if you've had this experience, but I know when I listen to Benatar or read these pithy statements about antinatalism, I think sometimes it makes me feel a little bit down. I don't know, like I know the problem is obviously not deciding not to bring a being into existence is not the same, is completely separate from deciding to continue living. Deciding whether antinatalism is not pro-mortalism, like you were saying before, and yet I think it's understandable that if you think about the fact that that it's a shame that we were born, that it's a shame that we were brought into existence, then it's I think it's understandable that it could make you feel a little bit down, and like
I mean, if you think you've got problems, yeah, I'm sure you. I said, if you think you've got problems, my problem. I mean, even whether to put this out anymore, I have to think about my own children and because I speak to my children a lot about it. I mean, probably too much, and I don't speak about it a lot now because they don't like it, right? But they know full well that the worst. I know this sounds so outrageous what I'm about to say to so many people, especially Jewish people, but to me, the last thing in the world I want to see is them having children. I really don't want that for them. I don't want it for the children. And that's like heavy stuff to say to a child who's been brought up in a completely different way to this idea, has been brought up, all their friends are getting married and having children and all that. And it's very difficult. I've got a young 13-year-old, and by saying that, I already admitted that I am responsible for all of his pain and suffering, and he sometimes uses that against me, which is kind of all right on some level, and I don't mind it on some level, and on some level it's also I think on his part a bit of a misunderstanding, because as someone in this strange position of being antinatalist and having had 3 children, which is a lot, the person that had the 3 children, right, had absolutely no idea about anything that we're talking about. It just wasn't on the radar. And I was thinking, as you were speaking at the beginning of this, that I had never met anybody who'd made a conscious decision not to have children until I was at least over 30 years old. I've never met anyone like that.
Yeah.
I mean, there might have been people. I'm sure there were people that I knew in university that may have had. They were thinking. Some people think about this when they're very young. They don't want to have children. But I've never met anyone, and definitely not the Jewish community, who said, no, I don't want to have children. I just never met anyone like that. And my children have been brought up in that atmosphere, so it makes it quite tricky. But I know it can make you feel down. And on the other hand, our thoughts come in, all sorts of thoughts come in and out of our minds. And, on the other hand, I could say to you that whilst, yes, a thought might come in and make you feel that's, really you shouldn't have been born, right? But think about, like, I don't think you realize, you will never, you won't realize what you have prevented, the amount of suffering you have prevented. You will never know, how much suffering you have prevented of yourself, right? because I can tell you as a father that I don't think there's anything that's worse than watching my children suffer. Right? It's horrible. Yeah. And you've prevented that. So you'll never have to go through that. You've prevented your children from suffering, right? And you prevented their children from suffering. Yeah. So if you ever get a moment of feeling down that you should never have been born, well, yeah, it's true you should never have been born, and it's true your parents should never have had you, but then nobody's parents should ever have had them. And the only reason your parents had you is because their parents had them, and, you know, and all that wasn't really their fault, right? So to say you shouldn't have been born is a bit silly, really, isn't it? Because you were born, right?
Right.
But you having come to that decision in this society is it's still extremely rare. Which is, you know, sometimes I think to myself, how is it that I reached age 51, that I had access to the internet? I also had access to, it's not like I'm sort of quite mad, right? I'm quite out of the box, mad, a bit of a madman, right? And I'd still not come across this idea till I was 51 years old with the advent of the internet. Which shows you how deep it is in the DNA and in the culture. It's just so ingrained, so that when you feel you or any other person who's made that decision ever feels that sadness about that, you can counteract it with how much suffering you have prevented. It's colossal.
I appreciate that. That actually is really helpful. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but I guess it's true. It's that, yeah, it's.
And this brings me on to the last point that I wanted to talk about, which is that I want to have these series of talking to people about this in relation to COVID. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you firstly, how has how does the situation in the world around COVID, how has that tied in with your thoughts about procreation?
Yeah. Well, I think that it's only reinforced it, to be honest, because again, we talked about how we imagine we're going to give our children a great life, but the fact is that we can't really predict the way the world's going to be, and nobody could have predicted this, right? And although there's that video of Bill Gates predicting it a few years ago, but for most of us, we bring these children into the world not knowing that there's going to be a pandemic at some point. So, and I think it's important, and it kind of ties into your last point about, or the point we were discussing about the sadness involved, and it's kind of a negative thing to talk about. But I think it's also important for us when we talk about this, especially with other people, that we acknowledge the beautiful things in the world, that we acknowledge the positives, that, how amazing it is and how beautiful it is to see the health workers and the, saving people's lives, and people who are bringing food for the health workers, and all the people involved in making the best of this really terrible situation. So we're not ignorant to the beauty of the beautiful things in life, and the truth is that I in some ways I feel bad that I've come to this logical conclusion, because I think seeing a newborn baby is one of the most beautiful things, or seeing even a baby inside the mother's womb and one of these crystal clear ultrasounds. I think it's just on an emotional level, not a psychological level, but just emotionally, it's just so beautiful, and or the way somebody maybe overcomes an addiction, or powers through a challenging situation and becomes a better person. I think there is so much beauty in the human existence, and it's not that we're blind to that, or that we're ignoring that, or we're just focusing on the negative. Again, like what I was saying before, that's my one concern that I have, is that when people see these tweets or these discussions with Benatar or whoever, they might be tempted to just say, okay, they're just negative people. They're ignoring all the beautiful things in the world. And I think it's important to acknowledge that criticism, to heed that criticism in the sense that we do need to show that we are cognizant of these beautiful things, and including with the pandemic, all the beautiful acts of heroism that are going on. And yet, when we include that into the equation, and we still say, okay, if you would have known that there's going to be a pandemic beforehand, even with all the heroism, even with all the beautiful things going on, it's not something that we would have chosen to put ourselves in. So why would we choose to put someone else into it?
Yeah, I like that, and it's I think it is important to be aware of the beauty. But I'd like to just come back to one thing that you said that just also reminded me of another point, and there are just so many points in this, which is that whilst yes, a newborn baby is a beautiful thing, and the whole development of a child, and there's so much. I mean, I've had incredible amounts of joy from the children all the way through, and certainly a huge amount when they were very young. They were just absolutely delightful and really, really funny, and they're also very talented, and I've had lots of great times with them, and sometimes I forget that. And I appreciate you saying that, and I need to remind myself of that on a regular basis, so I will do well to. Having said all that, you can experience that if you really want to. You can experience that by adopting a child.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I was hoping that this would come up. Absolutely.
And and I think that's something, that's one of the many things that I think really needs to be looked at, which relates to antinatalism. So there's A, making adoption much easier, B, making it much more. And I've been speaking about sort of having tax breaks for people who've had a vasectomy, so making it much more attractive for people to not to procreate, and also going back, just one other thing that I remembered from your story about getting out the party, and this is another whole discussion, but I think that there needs to be, or it would be good if people were to start to talk about being able to take your own life easily if you want to, because I feel like that should be something that people have the right to do if they want to. And it's a very tricky question, which is why I would still prefer people not to procreate, so that people don't get put in that position. Yeah. But if they are put in that position at the moment, it's very, very difficult to do it. If you want to get out of it, if you want to. So I think that's something that would be good to also to be talked about, is making, okay, it's been really, really good talking to you. Is there anything else that comes up for you about antinatalism, and anything else that comes up for you? Anything else?
Oh, I mean, like you said, we could talk about this forever, but I mean, I'd mentioned this in the blog post, but some people one counter argument some people might think is, well, we make decisions on behalf of other people all the time. We vaccinate our children, and we decide what school they're going to go to, but I think in those cases, it's the other option is for them to be living without having the vaccine, or living without schooling. So whereas having kids, the other option is just nothing. So,
or adopting,
or adopting. Right. But I mean, for the child, the option.
For the child. Yeah,
it's just not to come into the world to begin with. But and there are other Jewish teachings. I mean, I think anyone who reads Ecclesiastes should end up seriously questioning their natalism, because I mean, like, there's this one, I have it here, Ecclesiastes 4, chapter 4, verses 2 and 3, and I praise the dead who are already dead more than the living who are still alive, but better than both is he who has not yet been, and has not yet seen and has not seen the evil deeds that are done under the sun. And we find it elsewhere. I mean, you mentioned the passage in the Talmud about this argument they had. It's mind blowing. I'll just read it quickly. It says, for 2.5 years, the school of Shammai and the school of Hillel disagreed. This is the two major schools, rabbinic schools in the first century, where they were always arguing, and they had this disagreement. One group said it would have been preferable had man not been created than to have been created. And the other group said it is preferable for man to have been created rather than not being created. So after 2.5 years of having this argument, it says they were counted and they concluded they must have taken some vote of some sort. And they concluded that it would have been preferable had man not been created than to have been created. So usually when they have these arguments between these two schools, they go unresolved. So it's very unusual. They actually decided we have to resolve this, and they actually resolved it on the side of antinatalism. And then it says, however, now that he has been created, he should examine his actions and seek to correct them. There was once you're already here, to make the best of the situation, and work on yourself, and be a good person. And I think that's again to make this not a negative thing, but a positive thing. To me, I guess that's an important message to take with us, is that it's not going to help anyone just to be sour about it, to be like, oh, like this is so sad, like we're put in the situation and it's so terrible. I think a healthier response is to say, okay, yeah, it's a sunk cost. We can't change the past, but what we can change is the future, and to say, okay, I'm gonna, now that I'm here, I'm gonna live my best life, and hopefully help others live their best lives, and like it says in Ecclesiastes 3:12, that there's nothing better for people who are living than to be happy and to do good. And that, to me, that's what it comes down to, right? Now that we're here, might as well be happy and do good in this world.
And I'd like to add to that, which is that another argument against procreation is that if you do want to really do good here, you by having children, that will deflect you, and it will use up huge amounts of money and time, and energy and spiritual and psychological and emotional energy, a huge amount, just to give your child a chance to sort of be a reasonable human being takes a huge amount of resources, and those resources, you could argue, could be so much better put to use, either by adopting, if you've got what it takes to do that, or by using your time and money for the people that are already here. And there's many of them that need our help, of all ages.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Like I remember, actually, I forgot to mention this. One thing that helped me on my antinatalist journey was a friend of mine said, "Why would you breed a new dog if you can adopt one from a dog pound?" And I was like, wow, I never thought of that. Like, and I was like, I was trying to think of ways to counter that, and I never really did. But I still haven't found a good really counter argument to that. Like, why would you breed a new dog if you can take one from a dog pound and give it a better life? Not to compare humans to dogs, but the point is, on that, at least in that regard, I don't see a difference. Like you said, if you can take a child who's already here and has a horrible life, and you can give them a better life, just like when you take the dog from the dog pound and give the dog a better life, why would you create a new one? Why would you breed a new one?
And by the way, for those who adoption may not be right for all sorts of reasons, there are other ways that you can help. There are other ways that you can help children if you want to, by being in education, or by being a godparent, or if you've got anyone in your family that has got children, you can be You can be an uncle or an aunt or a this, whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah, a mentor, a big brother, a
Yeah.
big sister kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or you, if you prefer adults, you can help adults. I mean, there's no end of what you can do with your time and your resources. Anyway, thank you very, very much for joining me. It was really, really lovely to meet you. And yeah, maybe we'll speak again sometime, and be well.
You too. Thanks a lot for having me. I enjoyed it.